stability, clarity. And remember, relaxation is the foundation, like the roots of the tree. And then on the basis of relaxation, we can emphasize stability, stable attention. And then on the basis of a more stable attention, then we can emphasize clarity of attention. You need to work on them in that order, or emphasize them in that order. And the objects we're using in the Shamatha practice in this retreat are three. First, the breath. We looked at that yesterday, of course. The full body, the rhythm, the abdomen, the nostrils, some variations there for the breath practice, each one having their own unique benefits. And now today we're going to be looking at the mind as the object, so we got a little taste of that in the last meditation at the end, just to observe the mind. And of course that has its own unique benefits, which we'll talk about shortly. And then tomorrow we're going to turn awareness in upon itself and simply know we're aware, resting in awareness. And that also has its own unique benefits, and we'll be looking at that practice tomorrow. And in the meditation texts, we get a long list of possible options. Some of you who have maybe a little bit more background in Tibetan Buddhism, sometimes here in the Shamatha practice, what's recommended as the object is use a mental image of a Buddha, focus on that. But if you've ever tried that, I think most people find that extremely difficult. One is it's a complex visualization and we don't tend to be very good at visualizing. And secondly, we're not that familiar with what a Buddha looks like. So for many of us, that would be very difficult to use. But some people who are naturally gifted in visualization may find that actually the best object. You know, if we're like an interior designer or architect or artist or something, we may find visualizing very powerful. And so then a visual image of a Buddha might be the best object for them. But for the most of us, I think it's quite difficult. And then sometimes the meditation texts even say, oh, you find focusing on the breath too difficult? Okay. What you can do then is find yourself a stick or a pebble, put it down and look at it. So we could use a visual object to start the practice. Or sometimes people even use a repetitive sound like chanting a mantra or something. So you could use a visual object or a sound to begin this practice. But these sense objects are very coarse, meaning you'll find that you'll only be able to get so far in the practice. Then you'll have to go beyond that. So the texts say, okay, if you're starting with a visual object, once you start to get into the practice a bit, then shift your attention to a mental image of that object. So we'll need to go from sensory to mental if we want to go further, because these sense objects are quite coarse. And of course the general recommendation is find an object that resonates with you and then stick with that object. Don't keep changing the object. But actually Alan Wallace has also an alternate recommendation, which I think also is very valid. So let's have a look at what he says in his Attention Revolution. So this is on page 6. He says, to guide meditators along these 10 stages, and of course the 10 stages are the 9 stages plus the results of Shamatha. He says, I have chosen from Buddhist teachings 3 techniques that I have found effective for people in the modern world. These 3 techniques are the basis for the 3 divisions of this book. For the first 4 stages, you should practice whatever method you find easiest. By stage 5, the mind is relatively stable and you can move on to subtler techniques. For achieving the first 4 stages, I recommend the practice of mindfulness of breathing, variations of which can be found in Zen, Vipashyana and Tibetan Buddhism. Mindfulness of breathing means settling your awareness on the sensations involved in breathing, continually returning your attention there whenever your mind wanders. Beginning with the 5th stage, I recommend a method called settling the mind in its natural state. So that's the name he gives to the practice we're going to do today, observing the mind. In this technique, you direct your attention to mental experiences, that is, all the events such as thoughts, mental images and emotions that arise in the domain of the mind. This method is drawn from the Dzogchen lineage, but is found in other Buddhist traditions as well. With the instructions for the 8th attentional stage onward, we move on to the still subtler practice of maintaining awareness of awareness itself. So that's the practice we're going to do tomorrow. The technique is called Shamatha without an object. Here the practice is not so much one of developing attentional stability and clarity, as it is of discovering the stillness and luminosity inherent in awareness itself. The training in mindfulness of breathing may be helpful to anyone, including those seeking to prevent or treat attention deficit hyperactivity disorders. Many people find the second practice, that of settling the mind in its natural state, to be more challenging, but some meditators take to it naturally. Likewise, the practice of awareness is subtler still, but it may be optimal from the beginning for those who are strongly drawn to it. You may use any one of the 3 methods to progress along all 10 stages of attentional development, or you may follow the sequence described in this book. How fast you progress will depend on the level of your commitment and the degree to which your lifestyle and environment support such practice. So what he's saying is that any one of these objects, the breath, the mind, awareness, we can start from the very beginning if we're very drawn to it and use that all the way. Or we could start with the breath, because that tends to be more easy for most people. Work with that till about stage 4, our mind has become more stable, more clear, more focused. Then we can switch to observing the mind, and you'll find it easier, and continue with that till about stage 8, and then switch to resting and awareness to finish the path to Shamatha. So that is also, I think, a very good recommendation. But let's now have a look at today's practice. And again, Alan Wallace calls this settling the mind in its natural state. So first we have to be clear about what is the object, what are we observing in this practice. So the object of this practice is the space of the mind plus whatever mental events arise in that space. So mental events are, of course, things like thoughts, emotions, memories, mental images and so forth. Which means in this practice, we're not focusing on sense objects. So we're not paying attention to sounds, sensations, visual objects and so forth. Of course, sensations, sounds and so forth will arise in this practice, but we're not paying attention to them. Let them be there, we're not focusing on them. The only thing we're focusing on is mental events, thoughts, emotions, mental images, memories and so forth. And of course, we are to simply observe them as they arise and pass, without following them, without trying to get rid of them. Meaning, in this practice, we're not trying to make our mind still. If you've ever tried to make your mind still, you know it doesn't work. It just makes it more agitated. And actually, in some sense, in this practice, it might be better to have thoughts than no thoughts. Because if you have no thoughts, nothing much happening, there's a danger we just drift into a very dull, blank state. Whereas if there's thoughts there, we have to pay attention to observe them. So we want to have this mind of, if thoughts are there, that's okay. If there's no thoughts, it's okay. Both equally okay. Have no preference. No preference whether there's thoughts there or no thoughts. No preference whether there's nice thoughts or not so nice thoughts. All is okay. No preference. Whatever's there, we just observe it. So this, of course, is a shamatha practice. The goal of this practice, like the breath practice, is to cultivate a calm, clear, focused mind. But this practice has enormous side benefits. Now, many of you will probably find this much more challenging than the breath, probably for two reasons. One is the mind is a little bit more subtle object than the breath. The breath is physical, tangible, a little bit easier to focus on. And the second reason is in our modern society, we do not tend to have a habit of observing our thoughts and emotions. Our strong habit, of course, is either following them, getting caught up in them, or if we don't like them, trying to suppress them. That is our strong habit, following and suppressing. So then, to suddenly be able to just watch them arise and pass, probably not going to be so easy. But, as the great Indian Buddhist master Shantideva says, no matter how difficult something seems, everything with practice becomes easy. So all we need to do is practice and develop the habit of observing. And over time, it will become easy. And that will be our new habit, instead of following and suppressing. And so, of course, that's going to give us enormous benefit. Because now, by following and suppressing, we get caught up in our thoughts, emotions, stories, and so forth. And we often get tormented and overwhelmed by these thoughts, emotions, and memories. So we really are the slaves of our own mind. By doing this practice, we'll become the masters of our own mind. Because if we can watch our thoughts, emotions, and memories, we're free of them. We're free of them. They can't do anything to harm us. If we really look at what a thought, emotion, or memory is, it's virtually nothing. They have no power in themselves to harm us. None whatsoever. They only have power if we give them power. And we give them power either by identifying with them and following them, or trying to suppress them. Then they have a lot of power to harm us. But if we can just step back and watch, they have no power to harm us. And of course, every time we step back and watch, we're not feeding the habit of them coming up again and again. Which means over time, our mind will naturally become more quiet and still. But also, in future, then if some strong mental event were to arise, some strong thought, strong emotion, strong memory were to arise, we could be fully present with it without it overwhelming us. So we really will become the masters of our own mind. And now, a lot of actually physical as well, and mental problems we have is because we're suppressing. We're suppressing. And so through this practice, we release that suppressing, so then these come up. And simply acknowledging them is actually the first part of healing the mind. And in fact, just acknowledging them may heal the mind fully. But at least it will start the healing process. And so this practice really is very much heals the mind as well. There was a question. Question?
In the beginning you said, bring your mind to the present moment. Thoughts, emotions coming not from the present.
Right, but there's a difference between, well, when do we observe the thoughts about the past is in the present moment. If we get caught up, we've gone into the past. But in the present moment, we can watch a thought that happens to be about the past or happens to be about the future, but we're still in the present moment. If we get caught up with it, then we're really gone into the past and the future. So there's a difference there. And I want to talk more about that in the next session as well, because that's a very important point. So let's have a look at the practice, then a couple of questions before we do the meditation. So here, Alan Wallace talks about this on page 83. He says, the object of mindfulness in the practice of settling the mind in its natural state is no longer the subtle sensations of the breath, but the space of the mind and whatever events arise within that space. The object of introspection, as in the earlier practice of mindfulness of breathing, is the quality of attention with which you're observing the mind. He says, as you venture into this practice, I would encourage you to memorize these quintessential instructions, which are, settle your mind without distraction and without grasping. Practicing without distraction means not allowing your mind to be carried away by thoughts and sense impressions. Be present here and now, and when thoughts arise pertaining to the past or future, or ruminations about the present, don't be abducted by them. As you hike on this trail of Shamatha, don't be a hitchhiker catching a ride with any of the thoughts and images that whiz through your mind. Rather, be like a kestrel hovering motionlessly as it faces the wind, slightly moving its wings and tail feathers to adjust to changes in the currents of the air. Even when your attention is settled in the present, you may still grasp onto the appearances to the mind. Whenever you prefer one mental object over another, whenever you try to control the contents of your mind, and whenever you identify with anything at all, grasping has set in. Here is the challenge at hand. Be attentive to everything that comes up in the mind, but don't grasp onto anything. In this practice, let your mind be like the sky. So this is a nice analogy that's very helpful, is that our mind is like the sky, and the thoughts are like the clouds moving through the sky. And he says, whatever moves through it, the sky never reacts. It doesn't stop anything from moving through it. It doesn't hold on to anything that's present, nor does it control anything. The sky doesn't prefer rainbows to clouds, butterflies to jet planes. Whatever comes up in the field of awareness, without distraction or grasping, just let it be. So just let it be means don't get caught up in it, and don't try and suppress or get rid of it. Just let it be, just watch it as it arises and passes. One more point about practice, and maybe a couple of questions before we go to the meditation. And that is, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's very much recommended to have the eyes at least slightly open when we meditate, because if we have the eyes closed, then often we drift into dullness. But certainly here in this practice, it's very much recommended to have the eyes open. And there are a number of reasons for that, a number of benefits. One is that if we have the eyes open, and we can have them either naturally open or partially, whichever you prefer, is that it helps to improve clarity. Again, with eyes closed, it's much easier to drift into dullness. Also with eyes open, even though we're not really looking at anything, it still helps us to lock us better into the present moment. With the eyes closed, it's much easier to drift off into the past and the future. Also, of course, we want to be able to observe our thoughts and emotions in daily life without getting caught up in it. But if we've only ever meditated with eyes closed, observing thoughts and emotions, then it's hard to bring that into daily life, because because generally in daily life we have our eyes open. So it'll be harder to bring in daily life. But if we've meditated with eyes open, looking at thoughts and emotions, observing them, then it's much easier to bring that into daily life, because we have now built up the habit of observing thoughts and emotions with the eyes open. So it's much easier to bring it into daily life. And the last reason why having the eyes open is very helpful in this practice is, with the eyes closed, we have a strong sense of inner and outer. There seems to be a me in here and a world out there. There seems to be this very strong subject-object duality. Whereas with eyes open, this sense of duality is not as strong. It starts to break down. And that's what we're actually coming to realise in Vipashyana, that there is no subject-object duality. Which means if in Shamatha practice, if we've already started to weaken that by having the eyes open, then that's going to be helpful when we move into Vipashyana practice as well. So these are some of the benefits to have the eyes open, again, either naturally or partially. And of course, we're just resting our gaze in the space in front of us. So we're not really looking at anything, but also we're not trying to deliberately unfocus. So sometimes people deliberately try to unfocus and they strain the eyes. So we don't want to strain the eyes. Just rest your gaze in the space in front of you. A little bit like sometimes in daily life we're daydreaming, we're caught up in some daydream, we have our eyes open, but we're not really looking at anything. So similarly, we have our eyes open here, but we're just focusing on the mental events, what's happening in the mind. So that's the practice we're going to do. Any questions about that before we go to the practice?
Usually the mind is full, my mind is full.
Full?
Full with my mind, with thoughts and reactions, usually. But I've noticed that when I put the projector on the mind, like the awareness of the mind, then there's nothing. And I wonder, and it's for a few minutes, not only for seconds. And the only thing that there is my question. What is there? That's the only thing that I noticed. What is there? I'm asking.
So that's a thought.
What?
That's a thought.
But that's the only thought that I have. Usually, I have so many. And then I just stay with this thought and for quite a while, waiting for something to come up. And only this question.
I'm going to talk more about this after the meditation, but a brief answer is one of the reasons this happens is we are too intense in our focus. That like daily life, when we focus, we tense. So we feel like if I don't pay very close attention here, I'm just going to get swept away. So yes, we need to pay close attention, but we do that like with intensity. We're very tense. And of course, if we do that, we're suffocating the mind. There's no space for anything to come up. So if you notice you have this intense focus, then we need to relax. And then of course, the other reason why maybe not much is appearing is we may be there, but our mind is quite dull. And so of course, if our mind is dull, then there's probably a lot of things going on, but we don't notice it. A little bit like when we start to focus here, because our mind is not very clear, we don't notice much here. But that doesn't mean there's no sensations there. It just means our mind is not clear enough to notice the sensations that are there. So therefore, what I would recommend is check. Am I really intensely focusing? If so, relax. Or am I sort of drifting a little bit into dullness? Then pay closer attention. But then, of course, all the things like there's nothing there, I mean, that's a thought. And remember, what we're observing here is not just thinking, it's all mental events, including things like frustration, feeling frustrated that we're not seeing anything. That is a mental event. Boredom is a mental event. Agitation, all of those things are mental events. So we're not just observing discrete thoughts, but emotions, memories, images, and so forth. So the emotions and so forth are very close to us and a little bit harder to see, but pay particular attention to those. You know, like you're watching and then somehow you're feeling a bit frustrated that you're not seeing anything. Well, there you go. There's a mental event, frustration. So just watch that.
I find it difficult to concentrate on mental events because I feel they come in all kinds of modalities. For example, memories come to me as images, thoughts are like sounds, talking, feelings are like sensations in the body. So I feel like I can't really, there's not a space, I don't feel like there's a space of the mind that I'm observing, because if I observe, then I can't hear. If I hear, then I can't feel the...
Yeah, but remember, in this practice, we're not focusing on sensory.
Yeah.
We're placing all our attention on the mental. So, in fact, what you will notice, in fact, if we get deeper into the practice and we have better attention on the mental, what you'll experience is that there'll be sounds going on, you won't hear them, but that's good. It means you're not getting distracted because you're focusing on the mental. And you're not really, maybe you don't even really notice the body anymore. Good.
No, I mean, but I perceive the mental events as like images or sounds within me. I mean, they're not, it's not like someone
Sure. So, yeah, but then just observe that. And again, the key, remember, first relaxation, then stability, then clarity. So first make sure we're nice and relaxed, otherwise we're just going to get agitated. And stability means just try to observe what's there without getting caught up. It may not be very clear, but that's okay. I mean, that's where we are now. Clarity will come later. We'll be able to, like here initially, we sort of notice something vaguely, but that's okay, that's where we are. And just keep doing that and then it'll become more and more clear. So similarly here, relaxation and just observe whatever's there, no matter how vague or unclear it is, just observe that without getting caught up and just keep doing that and slowly those things will become more and more clear, but that'll take time, so just be patient. Then we go to the practice.
I felt like my awareness was up here and I try to, like, there is a physical place.
Yeah. So the question is, it seems like awareness has a physical place sort of up here. I mean, that's natural because most of our sense faculties are here. And so it seems like awareness is happening where the sense faculties are happening. But again, what you will notice is that as we get into this practice and we're more focused on the mental domain and less on the physical sensory domain, this strong sense of awareness here will start to dissipate. And particularly with the eyes open, for many of us the visual is the dominant sense, and so we have a sense awareness is just behind the eyes. But then what can be helpful is when you go home is to meditate in a dark room, so you don't have that reference point with the eyes, and see what happens. But you will find that once we start to get deeper into this practice, because the sense faculties start to go a little bit dormant, because we're more focused in the mental domain, I think you may find that will shift a bit. But in this practice, it doesn't really matter that you have a sense the awareness is here, because in Shamatha, we're not trying to figure out anything. We're not trying to figure out where is this awareness. That is Vipashyana. So in Shamatha, we're just observing, so don't worry too much about that. Okay, let's do the practice. Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. Allowing the entire body to to become completely relaxed, completely at ease.